He didn't have a name, not one that mattered, not to the people who hired him, not to the ones he was sent to kill, and certainly not to the church, which believed men like him had long forfeited the right to be remembered. He was a shadow among mud, a mistake in the corner of a hall, a heartbeat that refused to stop long after it should have. In the medieval world, death was loud. War was loud. Executions were loud. The plague was very, very loud. But the assassin, he was quiet. And that's why they feared him, and why they forgot him just as fast. Because no one wanted to remember that death could come silently, without reason, without warning, and sometimes without justice. You're imagining hoods, daggers dipped in poison, a leap from a rooftop, and a clean exit through candle smoke. No. He was barefoot, mud up to his knees, smelling of onions and fatigue. He didn't glide across rooftops. He crept behind pigs. He crouched behind carts. He slept in hay and woke to the sound of rats gnawing at his cloak. He didn't carry poisoned darts. He carried a chisel, a belt knife dull from cutting too many apples. He wasn't trained in a secret brotherhood. He was taught by an older man who died 2 jobs in and left him nothing but a whisper. If you don't breathe, they won't hear you. That was the extent of his education. Why do anything in the Middle Ages? Because you were hungry, because the harvest failed, because your father died in a ditch and left you nothing but a bent spoon and a handful of curses. The assassin didn't choose this life. He was handed it by a man with money and hate. You want to eat? Then get rid of someone. Quietly. Don't ask why. He didn't ask. He never asked. Because in this time, questions got you remembered, and remembrance got you killed. They called it a contract. That was generous. More often than not, it was a breathless whisper behind a tavern. A few coins clinked into his hand, and a vague direction. He sleeps near the mill. She keeps a knife under her pillow. Don't mess it up. And that was it. No names, no assurances, just a task, and the weight of knowing that someone else's breath would stop because yours hadn't yet. He remembered the sound more than the face. It was always the sound. A gasp, like a sack being dropped into a well. No scream, just surprise. His hand had shaken. The blade had slipped. It wasn't quick. Afterward, he vomited behind the stable and tried not to see her eyes in the puddle beside him. That night, he didn't sleep. Not from guilt. From fear that someone had seen, that someone would speak, that someone might send another assassin after him. Even in death, he would never be the last. coins, if he was lucky, a rabbit carcass, if he was not. Once, a man tried to pay him in boots, too large, cracked at the sole. He took them anyway, because blood didn't keep you warm, but boots might. He never asked for more. He never bargained, because bargaining meant talking, and talking meant remembering, and remembering meant a grave. He didn't. Not really. He'd close one eye, then the other. But dreams weren't safe places. Dreams had faces. He slept in barns, in the corners of empty chapels. Once, under a bridge with a dying cow for warmth, he wrapped his knife in cloth, kept it near his chest, not because he feared being robbed, but because his own hands might forget what they'd done if they didn't still feel the weight of it. Guilt, perhaps, but more so, cold. It crept in no matter how many cloaks he layered, how close he curled to the fire, how many times he walked in circles to keep warm. And rats. They found him no matter where he slept. Sometimes he thought they knew what he'd done, knew who he was. One bit his finger once, drew blood. He didn't flinch, because pain was the only thing left that reminded him he wasn't a ghost yet. They didn't say much. Sometimes he caught a glance, a whisper. They never said assassin. That word was for myths. They said things like, "That one doesn't blink much. He walks like he's counting the dead. I wouldn't let him near my fire." He pretended not to hear, but he remembered. Because even the nameless crave some echo of identity, even if it's only fear. Not always. Sometimes another showed up. Same eyes, same silence. They didn't speak, just nodded, slept a few feet apart, left before dawn. One of them once left behind a tooth wrapped in leather. He still had it. Didn't know why. Maybe proof that someone else had existed who did what he did and kept breathing, even if only for a while. It paid poorly. It ended quickly. It left no stories, no wives, no songs, no mercy. But it was quiet. And in a world that screamed with hunger and war and plague, quiet was something, even if it meant being forgotten. He wasn't the first to fail, and he wouldn't be the last. It was supposed to be simple. A candle merchant, middle-aged, no guards, no dog, no children. He studied the pattern, waited for the right night, slipped in after dusk through the alley beside the pig pen. He missed. His blade caught the shoulder instead of the neck. The man screamed. Once, loud enough, enough to wake the neighbors, enough to light torches, enough to change his name, his face, his future. He ran. slipped in manure, tore his cloak. He didn't look back, but the guilt, that always followed. You might think it ended with death. It didn't. Failure was slower than that. He starved in the woods, couldn't return to the village. His contact disappeared. The coins never came. For days, he lived on snow water and bark. His knife rusted, his feet torn. The wound he'd received from a pitchfork, accidental, panicked, became infected. He chewed on willow bark to numb the fever, spoke to trees, forgot what language was. He survived. Barely. But after that, he never walked the same again. Not from the wound, but from the knowing that even the best plan could rot like bread left too long in the dark. There were others. Names he never knew, faces he saw only once, across the fire, behind a hood, through a broken window. Sometimes they left in pairs. Fewer returned. He heard rumors. A body found in a well. A stranger buried without rites. Bones in the woods with a coin pouch still intact. They said one was caught mid-act, tied to a post, skinned before morning. He didn't ask if it was true, because if it was, he might never sleep again, and if it wasn't, he might start to hope. Both were dangerous. They came not with torches, but with silence. A group of 5, faces covered, boots soft in the mud. No trial, no accusation, just a message sent by action. You weren't supposed to survive that last job. He ran. They followed. For 3 days, he didn't stop. Through snow, marsh, stone, he crossed a river chest deep, hid beneath the carcass of a horse, chewed roots with a broken tooth. When he looked in the water, he didn't recognize the thing staring back. Eyes like burnt ash, skin pale as lard, lips cracked from wind and silence. He lived. They didn't. He never spoke of how. But one of them never made it home, and he left something behind. A ring. He still kept it, wrapped in cloth, buried in his boot heel, just in case someone ever asked if he remembered. It didn't knock. It crept in, through the gaps in thought, the pauses between heartbeats. He began to talk aloud, not to anyone, just to the void. He answered questions no one asked, laughed at jokes no one made. One night he apologized. To the fire. Another, he tried to confess to a passing fox. He hadn't been injured. He hadn't been poisoned. Just alone. Too long. Too often. And silence. It's a beautiful thing. Until it becomes your only companion. Then it starts to whisper. The ones who lingered. There was one he never forgot. A woman, old, half-blind. He wasn't sent to kill her. He was sent to kill her son. He did. Quickly, efficiently. She didn't scream, didn't chase, didn't cry. She just sat beside the body, ran her hand through her son's hair, and whispered, "He was all I had." He didn't run, not this time. He stood in the doorway, unsure what to do. She looked at him, not with hate, not with fear, just with something worse. Understanding. He left without finishing his task. Didn't take payment. For weeks, her face followed him in puddles, in smoke, in dream. He hoped she lived. He feared she did. They didn't like secrets, and assassins were full of them. A priest once spotted him in a town square, kneeling, not in prayer, but resting. He asked too many questions. The next week, the bells rang not for mass, but for blood. Warrants were read. Descriptions vague, but familiar. A man who walks like he's listening. Face forgotten. Voice rarely used. He disappeared that night. Not by magic, by mud, by darkness, by knowing which roads never got patrols. After that, he avoided churches, not because of God, but because God had soldiers, and soldiers didn't forget. Not his hands. They worked long after they should have stopped. Not his feet, though they bled more winters than not. What died first was his memory. He forgot the faces, then the names, then the places, not out of mercy, but necessity. He couldn't carry it all. He didn't want to. Sometimes he forgot why he was even on the road, only that he had to move. Always move. Until the breath stopped. And when it did, he hoped he'd be too far for anyone to remember who he'd been, or what he'd done. Not with glory, not with coins, not with revenge. He sat beneath a tree, shoes torn, knife long gone, watched the clouds drift, felt the wind sting his cheek like a question unanswered. He hadn't spoken in weeks. His voice, a memory he couldn't summon. A boy passed him once, offering bread. He shook his head. Not from pride, from the weight of unworthiness. The boy left, and he closed his eyes to the sound of leaves moving. No one came for him. No one marked the spot. But the next spring, wildflowers grew there, bright, unbothered, free. He would have hated them and loved them. He wasn't a hero, not even close. He was a man with too many nights and too few dreams. He lived in the corners of a history no one wanted to write. But if you listen, really listen, You might still hear his footsteps between the pages, soft, tired, unwanted, just like the job. He didn't have a sword. Swords were for knights, for parades, for songs, not for slipping through kitchens at midnight or crouching behind pigs. He didn't have poison either. It was too expensive, too loud, ironically. Victims foamed, twitched, made awful noises. No, if you wanted to kill someone quietly in the Middle Ages, you needed something far more advanced. You needed a good hammer. Yes, a hammer. Not even a special one. Just the kind a blacksmith might leave near his forge, or a carpenter might forget under his bench. It fit in the hand, swung with weight, made a soft, cracking sound if you hit just right behind the ear. If. He wasn't always that lucky. Sometimes the handle slipped. Sometimes it caught on a hood. Sometimes he missed entirely, and the sound wasn't soft at all. It was wet and loud, and people woke up. He had a knife, of course. Everyone had a knife. But knives were meant for bread, and if you used them on flesh, they dulled quickly. Tore instead of sliced. One night, he tried to slit a throat with a market blade he'd used earlier on salted pork. It snagged. The man jolted awake. There was screaming, a struggle. By the end of it, both of them were bleeding, and the man wasn't dead. Not yet. He had to finish it with a rock. Not elegant, not clean. But in this job, neither were required. You've heard stories. A quick loop, a drop from above. Silence. Rope was for dragging, not choking. Every time he tried, it got tangled. Around the arm, around the bedpost, once around his own foot. By the time he got the loop right, the victim had already turned and screamed. He abandoned rope entirely after nearly strangling himself in a chicken coop trying to ambush a shepherd. The chickens watched the whole thing. He could still feel their judgment. Shovels were underrated. Not the long-handled ones, too awkward, but the short, rusted kind used for fire pits or dung heaps. Perfect. Heavy, blunt, surprisingly effective when applied to the skull. He once kept one tucked in his cloak, carried it into a village. No one questioned it. Digging a grave early, someone joked. They weren't wrong. One time, just once, he thought it'd be poetic. A farmer, killed by his own pitchfork. It was leaning against the wall. Easy grab, quick jab. Except pitchforks weren't designed for killing. They bounced, bent. The tines caught in the man's coat, made a terrible squealing sound like nails on a church door. The victim fought back with a stool. The assassin fled, with a pitchfork stuck to his belt like a tail. He didn't try poetry again. These were favorites. Small, concealable, sharp. if borrowed fresh from a craftsman. He once used a leather worker's awl to end a man who owed debts to a lord. Quick, precise. But even these tools betrayed him. One night he thrust the chisel, and it snapped. Right at the hilt. Wood rot. Or maybe the steel was brittle. Either way, he was left standing there with a handle and a look of disbelief. He still finished the job. With a brick. Yes, a brick. Found it behind a tavern. Still smelled of ale and spit. It wasn't supposed to be part of the plan. But plans were rare luxuries. He didn't have blueprints or magic, just instincts. And when the dagger failed, the brick became justice. Heavy, clumsy, loud, very loud. But it worked. He washed his hands in a horse trough afterward. The water turned pink, then black. He didn't look at the reflection. Once, he strangled a man with the string from an onion sack. It was all he had. And the man was asleep, snoring loudly. The string dug deep, bit into the fingers. The man flailed for longer than expected. When it was done, his knuckles were raw. He never ate onions again. A broken lute string, snapped mid-strangle. A hot kettle burned his own hand worse than the victim. A candlestick, too slippery when covered in tallow. A goose, don't ask. He learned the hard way that not everything heavy was deadly. Some things just made noise, drew attention, and left bruises where silence was needed. In the movies of the future, assassins would glide. They'd wield perfect blades, move like smoke, disappear without sound. But in his world, the world of broken knives and chipped bricks and short shovels, killing was messy, ugly, loud when it wasn't supposed to be, and quiet only when it went terribly right. The tools didn't make him efficient. They made him desperate. And desperation, not skill, was the true mark of a medieval killer. It was meant to be a clean job. A tinner. Old, slow, predictable. The assassin waited until nightfall, crept in with a sharpened spade, swung once, and missed. The spade slipped from his sweaty grip and hit the stone wall with a clang that could have woken the Virgin Mary herself. The old man didn't scream. He threw soup. Hot, thick lentil soup. Right in the eyes. The assassin staggered, tripped over a chamber pot, knocked his head against the beam. He came to in a ditch hours later with the spade gone and the job unfinished. The only thing bruised worse than his ribs was his pride. It looked heavy enough. Solid brass, curved base, sharp stem. He'd seen it on the nightstand. Decided, in the moment, that it would do. It didn't. He brought it down once, and it cracked. Not the man's skull. The candle holder. The base snapped, and the stub cut his hand instead. Blood everywhere. Candle rolled onto the floor, started a fire. He fled. But the next morning, people spoke not of a murder, just a house fire. He never went back to check. Sometimes failure was a kind of mercy. People think it's quiet, painless, easy. It isn't. Feathers make noise. Victims thrash. The moment they realize they can't breathe, they fight harder than ever. And pillows? They leak. They betray. One night he tried to end a drunk nobleman that way. The pillow tore. Feathers everywhere. Looked like angels had exploded. He was found 2 days later covered in down, sleeping behind a barrel, coughing from the inhaled fluff. He stopped using pillows after that. Too soft, too theatrical, too much like fiction. Sometimes they fought back. Sometimes they won. Once a priest struck him with a crucifix. Not a symbol, an actual heavy wooden crucifix. Iron nails still fixed through the feet. It broke his nose. Twice. He ran that night with blood dripping from his face like penance. It was the first and last time he underestimated a man of faith. He'd once tried poison, borrowed from a wandering apothecary with too many secrets and no teeth. The assassin slipped it into ale, waited. The man drank, coughed, and vomited into the fire. The flames turned green, the smell like rotting almonds. Everyone fled. No one died, except the goat that licked the floor afterward. He buried it. Felt guiltier for that death than most. Cleverness, he learned, was unreliable. He returned to bricks. It was a thin blade, hidden in his boot, double wrapped in cloth. One night, while sleeping in a barn, he rolled and it slipped and pierced his thigh. It stayed there the rest of the night. He didn't remove it. Not from bravery, from exhaustion. He limped for weeks, fevered, dizzy, no job, no coins, no plan. He almost missed the irony. A killer, undone by his own hidden edge. Almost. There was one. A chisel. Short. Worn. Reliable. He carried it for 7 winters. Sharpened it on rock. Cleaned it with spit. Wrapped it in cloth like a relic. It never failed him. It never broke. It was the only thing in his life that didn't. And when he thought of quitting, he thought of the chisel, resting quietly in his satchel, waiting, almost as if it had become a part of him, or he a part of it. Once. only once. He killed a man with his hands, not out of choice. He'd been disarmed, cornered, trapped, and the only thing left was flesh. It wasn't silent. It wasn't quick. It was intimate. He never forgot the breath on his neck, the panic in the eyes, the slow fading of light. No tool could dull what that left behind. Afterward, he vomited, then wept, then walked for hours until his knees gave out and the ground rose to meet him. That night, he buried his hands in the dirt, as if to hide them from memory. No one came to his grave. There was no stone, just a pile of moss, a ring of disturbed earth, and silence. But under the soil, buried with him, 3 objects: a chisel, a broken brass candle holder, and a brick, each with its own sin, its own memory. No one marked the spot. No one remembered the man. But those tools, they still knew, still waited, still rusted quietly beneath the earth. He wore silence like a cloak. He walked without sound. He breathed like mist. But no matter how careful he was, no matter how light his footsteps, he could never silence the smell. Because in the Middle Ages, nothing smelled clean, especially not him. And when you're a killer who must remain invisible, but you reek like onion, blood, leather, and wet socks, you don't remain hidden long. His deadliest trait wasn't anger, it was odor. Everyone sweated. But assassins, they sweated like animals, because fear is wet, climbing walls, crawling through attics, hiding in chimney flues, his back soaked through 3 layers, his feet squelched in their own filth. His underarms could make a rat faint. There was no soap, no lavender, just lie and shame. Once, he overheard a woman mutter, "Something died nearby." Nothing had died. It was just him waiting in the hayloft, holding his breath, smelling himself. He wore leather not for armor, but for carrying tools, knives, awls, straps, leather pouches, leather bands, a leather collar once, tight against the throat. It stank of tallow, rot, and sometimes the animals it came from. In the rain, it bloomed. In the sun, it baked. In the dark, it fermented. He once crept up on a guard, only for the man to turn and gag. God's teeth! What's that smell? The assassin turned, too. Left the job undone. No payment, no risk. Just a lesson. Leather never lies. He had bad boots. Too small. Too cracked. Always damp. They trapped every scent, and turned it into a weapon against him. One night, he removed them to move more quietly on stone. The smell. Even he nearly passed out. Later, a dog found him. Didn't bark, just whimpered, and ran away. Another time, a monk lit incense in passing, looked at the assassin but said nothing, just burned sage harder. Blood has a scent, like iron in your mouth, but so do the tools that cause it. Knives, chisels, hooks, they rust, they flake, they oxidize. When he moved, they clinked softly, but worse, they smelled. Even wrapped in cloth, the scent of cold metal clung to his coat. One girl once asked, "Are you the knife man?" He didn't answer. He just walked away, but it haunted him. How could a child smell a blade before seeing it? What did that say about him? He tried to stay empty, but hunger made his hands shake. So he ate, quickly, in the dark. Cheese, onion, salt fish. The kind of food that lingers in the throat and seeps through your pores. He once killed a baker an hour after eating garlic. The widow claimed she smelled the killer before she saw her husband's body. That night, he scrubbed his tongue with ash. It didn't help, only made him smell like garlic and fire. Fear. It has no color, no weight, no shadow, but it fills a room, clings to clothes, settles into skin. He sweated it. He breathed it. He carried it like a flag. Animals sensed it. Children avoided it. Priests sniffed the air when he walked into town. He couldn't wash it off, because it wasn't on him. It was in him. And some things even death doesn't clean. It was a small village, barely more than 8 cottages and a crumbling chapel. The target was easy. An aging grain collector who had crossed a barren one too many times. He waited, watched. Then came the problem. A dog, half blind, one ear, tail like a rag. It didn't bark. It sniffed the assassin from across the road, through rain, through wind. And it didn't look away, even when he crouched, even when he turned his face. It sniffed, then whimpered, then ran to the collector's door. That night, he failed the job. Not because of the man, but because of a mutt who smelled fear beneath wool. He tried everything. Ash from burnt oak, mixed with water smeared under his arms, rubbed on boots, packed into sleeves. He smelled like a chimney. Not ideal, but better. Until it rained. The ash turned to sludge, dripped like black tears down his legs and neck. Someone screamed demon as he walked through the town square. He hid in a latrine for 3 hours, while children threw rocks at the door. He stopped using ash after that. Smelling like a killer was better than smelling like folklore. He once tried rubbing wild herbs into his clothes. Thyme, mint, yarrow. The plan was simple. Mask the stench. The result? Bees. So many bees. They followed him for half a mile. He dropped his knife, fell into a ditch, rolled through manure. When he stood up, they were gone. But the smell of manure stayed for days. And oddly enough, no one noticed him after that. He considered making it a regular thing. But even assassins have their dignity. His cloak was wool, old, heavy, black. Once. When wet, it reeked. Like sheep and rot and moldy hay. Like a storm rolled through a barn and never left. He once wore it into a church on a rainy day. By the end of the sermon, everyone else had moved 3 pews away. Even the priest hesitated to bless him. He understood. Even God must recoil from mildew. A miracle, really. He'd fallen into a river during a failed escape. Fast current, cold, no choice. He floated 2 miles downstream, washed clean by force. Mud gone, sweat gone. Even the smell of failure seemed to lift. He crawled out, and no one recognized him. Not the guard, not the barkeep, not even the contact who had hired him. He was invisible, and for one night he sat at a fire, drank clean water, and didn't smell like anything. It felt wrong. The silence around him wasn't protection, it was emptiness. He missed his own smell, missed being feared, missed being known, even if it was by scent alone. The next day, he put the cloak back on without drying it, and walked back into the stink like slipping into old skin. They stayed on him. From the first job. No matter how many rivers, no matter how much snow, no matter how deep the grave, they clung. Not the blood itself, but the memory of it. Iron in his nose, copper in his nails. Once, he rubbed wild garlic on his hands to hide it. Didn't work. His fingers still smelled like endings, like silence. Sometimes he wondered, did they smell him coming? Not with noses, not with lungs, but with something deeper, instinctual, ancestral, like animals before a storm. A shift in the air. A weight. He never asked the dying. There wasn't time. But sometimes, in the moment before the final breath, their eyes widened, like they recognized the odor. Not of man, not of beast, but of purpose, of inevitability, of death itself. You can train the hands, still the feet, quiet the breath, but scent is truth. And in the medieval world, where fires smoked and latrines leaked and fear hung like fog, a killer could be spotted by nothing more than the way the air changed when he entered a room. He lived his life hiding in shadows. But no matter how dark it was, you could always smell that he'd been there. He was taught that silence was a weapon, but no one taught him how loud the world could be when you needed it quiet most. Assassins don't die by sword. They die by sound. The scrape of a boot, the creak of a stair, the sneeze that came too soon. In the Middle Ages, noise was not just danger. It was death. And it came from everywhere, especially from himself. The house was perfect. Stone base, wooden loft, one target, alone, asleep, vulnerable. He crept in through the side door, crouched, stepped softly, then a single groaning plank. So soft, so slow, it almost didn't sound like anything at all. But it was enough. The man inside stirred, called out, and the assassin froze, mid-step, as if stillness could erase sound. It couldn't. The job was ruined. He had to leave, quick, barely missed being seen. From that night on, he feared houses more than swords, because houses had memory, and memory squeaked. He'd sharpened it too well. The edge, dragged from its sheath, whispered like wind on glass. Too smooth, too clean. It made a shked sound that echoed in his ears long after it left the scabbard. One night, he drew it inside a barn. A stable boy heard. Came to check. He wasn't the target, but he saw too much. And the assassin. He didn't want to kill the boy. He did. Because silence, once lost, demanded a terrible price. You'd think water would be harmless, but not when it falls. Rhythmically, predictably, loudly. One rainy evening, he hid under a leaking awning, waiting for a gate to open, and from above, drip, drip, drip. Not on him, on a tin pan beside the door, over and over. The sound blurred his senses, made it impossible to hear footsteps or whispers. He missed the moment, missed the signal, and the job went to someone else. When it rained after that, he plugged his ears with wool, not for warmth, for focus. There was a wheel of cheese in the corner, a luxury, the target's pride, and one mouse. Just one. But it chewed, and chewed, and chewed, loudly, rhythmically, in the dead of night. The assassin waited in the rafters, trying to time his descent. But the chewing blurred everything, threw off his heartbeat, distracted his breath. When he jumped, He slipped. The landing was loud. The man awoke, screamed. He lived. But the mouse didn't. The assassin snapped its neck before fleeing, not out of cruelty, out of principle. He had pushed it, carefully, even wedged a stone beneath. But doors, especially in medieval houses, had minds of their own. This one opened on its own, just a crack, just enough to let in wind. And noise. The latch clicked like a tiny bell. And the dog woke up. Not even the target's dog. The neighbor's. A chained mutt with a bark like thunder. The assassin leapt from the window, landed wrong, sprained his ankle. He limped 5 miles before collapsing under a cart. All because a door couldn't keep a secret. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Too risky to stop, too risky to hunt. So he crouched in a cupboard, knees tight to chest, watching the candlelight flicker across the floor. The target was asleep, so close, just beyond the wall. And then, grrrk. His stomach betrayed him. A low, long growl, like a dying dog, like thunder under skin. He held his breath, pressed his belly, prayed, but it came again. Grk, grulg. The target stirred, sat up, lit a candle. The assassin stayed frozen. He didn't die that night, but neither did the man. Because some noises, once made, cannot be taken back. You never think of breathing as noise. But in the pitch black, in the moment before death, even breath becomes betrayal. He held it as long as he could. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Then exhaled. Just a puff. But it echoed off stone. Soft, but clear. The target turned. Too alert. No kill. He left silently, but the shame rang louder than footsteps. After that, he trained his lungs like a monk, shallowed his breath, swallowed his own wind, until he could hold still longer than a corpse. He didn't wear them, but the priest did. A string of prayer beads hanging on the wall. When he brushed past them, they fell, hit the floor, one at a time, like a funeral march. The priest opened his eyes just in time to see the blade and smile, and, "Been waiting," he whispered. The assassin hesitated, not because of fear, but because that voice wasn't surprised. He left without killing, and never entered a church again. They moved before he did. Always. In cellars, in barns, in kitchens. Tiny claws, tiny squeaks. But sometimes they screamed. a high-pitched sound like a baby's first cry. Once, as he passed through a tunnel, a rat ran across his hand. He swatted it. It screamed. The echo bounced for what felt like hours. Later, a guard found fresh footprints. The job was called off. The rat lived. He didn't blame it. Even vermin want to be heard. He tried to still it, tried everything. Herbs, meditation, pain. But on the worst nights, when the moon was high and the air too thin, his heart would betray him. Thump, thump, thump. Like a drumbeat in a tomb, like a blacksmith at work. It filled his ears, his mouth, his bones. Sometimes he thought it would stop from fear alone. Sometimes he wished it would. But it never did. It just beat louder, faster, until silence was impossible. And then the job was over. One way or another. He once asked a dying man, "What did you hear before this?" The man blinked, coughed blood, smiled. "Your breath." It shook. That stayed with him. Not the blood, not the weight of the body. The idea that sound, even breathless sound, could haunt someone's last moment, could follow them, could mark him forever. So he began listening to the floor, to the trees, to the wind, to himself. And each time he heard something, he wondered if it would be the noise that got him killed. It began like every other job, simple, isolated manner. One nobleman, one window left unlatched. He was to enter, silent, precise, leave no trace, just absence. But the truth is, some nights aren't jobs, they're traps. And this was one. The message had been clear. He sleeps alone, has no guards, leaves the door unlocked. Too easy. And that should have been the first sign. But coin speaks louder than doubt. So he took the path through the trees, wore his softest boots, brought only two tools, a short blade and a rope. When he reached the manor, everything was silent. Too silent. Even the birds had stopped. It was cracked open. Just enough. Like an invitation. He hesitated, but wind whispered behind him, and cold pushed him forward. He slipped in, landed on stone. No noise. He smiled, and that too was a mistake. He'd been in hundreds, beds, chairs, candle holders, always the same. But this room, it was too neat, too still. No smell of sleep, no warmth in the blanket, no boots by the fire. He stepped forward. That's when the candle lit itself. There was someone in the corner. He hadn't seen them, but they were there, hooded, still, as if sculpted from shadow. And then, a voice. "You're late." The assassin froze. Not because of fear, but because the voice was familiar, not from life, from memory. It sounded like the baker, the one from 5 years ago, who had begged, who had bled, who had died on his knees. But it couldn't be, unless... No, not possible, still. His fingers trembled. He lunged. The blade cut air. No blood, no flesh, just cloth. And then the chair toppled, empty, no body, just a cloak stuffed with straw. The door slammed shut behind him. Candles along the wall burst to life, one by one, soft, flickering, revealing. Not a room, a stage, with ropes, hooks, tools he recognized, his tools, but twisted, reforged, hung on display, a museum of murder, his murder. He heard them, not from the door, from the ceiling, light, deliberate. Whoever it was, they were above him, watching. He drew his second blade, and something dropped behind him. He turned, saw nothing, turned again, and a boot struck his ribs, hard. He fell, coughed, blood, got up, and ran. He didn't look back, didn't need to, because the laughter followed him, soft, cruel, familiar. He thought he found an exit. Instead, he found the portraits of everyone he had ever killed, painted, framed, lined in silence. The baker, the monk, the girl by the well. He tried to scream. Nothing came out. The house knew him, better than he knew himself. He ran back to the main room, back to where it began. But the window, it was gone, bricked over, sealed. He was inside something older than walls, something that remembered. And it remembered him. They weren't rushing. They weren't loud. Just one step. Pause. Another. Pause. Coming from nowhere. Coming from everywhere. He backed against the wall, raised the blade. Eyes darting, wild. But the room was empty, and the footsteps stopped. Until they didn't. This time, it was the merchant. You stole breath that wasn't yours. Another voice. The child by the well. You didn't even look me in the eye. Then the priest. You feared silence, didn't you? He fell to his knees, pressed his palms to his ears. But it was inside him. These weren't ghosts. They were memories. And the house had unlocked them. He saw a door. It looked real. Rusted hinge. Loose frame. Almost open. He sprinted, hit it shoulder first. It gave way, only to reveal a stone wall. Painted. A fake. He collapsed backward, blade clattering, and above him, in the rafters, a figure moved. It didn't jump. It floated, like mist in reverse. A hood, a cloak, no face, no sound. It landed silently 3 steps from him. He couldn't breathe. His fingers fumbled for the knife, but something heavier pressed against his chest. Not a weapon, just presence. As if the guilt itself had grown limbs. He rose. Not from courage, from instinct. He slashed. The blade went through air. Again, again. No hit. No wound. Just silence. Until the figure raised its hand and pointed to the wall where one last portrait hung. He turned and saw himself, not dead, not bloody, just watching, as if waiting for permission. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He dropped the blade. It echoed too long. Then he dropped to the floor. He wasn't injured, not physically, but something inside him shut down, as if it finally realized what it was, who he was, and what he'd become. They found him at dawn, in the woods, barefoot, soaked, staring. No blood, no wounds, just silence. He didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he said only one thing. The house was awake. They didn't ask questions. They just fed him, gave him blankets, and left him alone. Because some nights don't follow you home. They wait for you to come back. He never returned to that manor, never took another job. He threw away his blades, burned his cloak, but the silence followed him, not in sound, not in shadow, but in the way people crossed the street, the way dogs whined when he passed, the way his own heart paused at every creaking door. He lived another 20 years, but never slept through the night, because deep down, he knew there are some nights you weren't supposed to survive, and when you do, they don't let go. They didn't start as sacred. They were things, rusted, found, stolen. But after years, they stopped being tools. They became parts of him, not extensions, attachments, cursed, loyal, heavy, things he should have let go, things that refused to let go of him. His first tool wasn't a knife, it was a brick. Found it in an alley, still warm from sun, still stained from someone else's blood. He kept it for months, used it twice. The first time, it broke a man's nose. The second time, it broke in half. He kept the pieces, wrapped them in cloth, buried one under his bed, carried the other in his satchel. He never used it again, but he couldn't throw it away, because it was his first, and firsts leave a scar, even when made of stone, not for sewing, for slipping under ribs. It was thin, cold, silent, perfect, until it bent inside someone. Not fully, just enough to feel wrong. He should have discarded it, but he didn't. He wrapped it in waxed leather, tucked it in his boot, and told himself, "One day I'll fix it." He never did. But every time he walked, it pressed against his ankle, reminding him of what precision used to feel like. It was meant for binding hands, or necks, or thoughts. Soft leather, cracked in places, smelled like old fear. He kept it tied around his thigh. Not visible, not useful, just there. He didn't know why, until one night he tried to cut it off, and his hand wouldn't move. The knife shook. The strap stayed. Some bindings aren't made by hands. They're made by history. Only one. Right hand, stitched by a woman he never thanked, worn in the rain, worn in the blood. The other had burned in a job gone wrong, but he kept this one. Even after the fingers tore, even after the color faded. It smelled like iron and regret. He wore it sometimes, not for protection, but to remember what warm hands once felt like. It wasn't meant for killing. It was meant for meat, for hauling, for hanging. But metal forgets its purpose when told to obey. He used it once on a man too heavy to lift. The sound it made, wet, splitting, final. He cleaned it, sharpened it, but it never felt clean. He buried it in a cloth sack, then unearthed it weeks later and kept it near his bed, because monsters sleep best beside their worst mistakes. He found it by accident, round, smooth, heavy enough, never used it, but held it, often, during long nights, before hard choices. It wasn't a weapon. It was a weight. He carried it like a prayer or a warning, and when asked why, he never answered, because he didn't know, only that when he held it, his hands stopped shaking, and that was enough. Not everything stayed. Some blades broke, some ropes snapped, some bags tore in the rain and were never found again. But the ones that stayed, the ones that followed, they weren't the sharpest or the strongest, just the ones that refused to leave, the ones that whispered, "You're still this." Even when he tried to forget, it was frayed, too short now, knotted in 3 places that wouldn't come undone. But it had worked 12 times, maybe more. He had cut it once to escape, then stitched it back together with animal sinew. It creaked when stretched, groaned when wet, and still he carried it, wrapped around his waist, hidden beneath layers. Not for use, not anymore, but because he couldn't stop hearing it. The sound it made when it tightened around a man's neck who whispered forgiveness as he died. It wasn't a mirror anymore, just a broken piece of polished tin, cracked, bent, clouded. But it reflected enough. He didn't use it to shave. He didn't check wounds. He used it to see if he was still real. Because sometimes, after the jobs, after the silence, after the blood, he wasn't sure. He'd stare into it, waiting for his face to look back like it belonged to him. It never did. But he still looked. Because killers forget, and mirrors don't. Small, round, smooth. He found it near a girl's hand. She wasn't the target. She wasn't even meant to be in the room. But she had reached for him, not with fear, with recognition. And he did what assassins do. Later, while clearing the scene, he found her button. It was still warm. He slipped it into his pocket. Years passed, but he never let it go. It was useless. It meant nothing. And it was everything. It had once held poison. Powdered nightshade, rare, expensive, gone now, spilled in a struggle, or maybe forgotten. He never refilled it, but he carried the pouch anyway. Why? Because it still smelled like death, even after all these years, even through layers of linen and leather. Sometimes he pressed it to his face and inhaled, not for comfort, but to remind himself what he had almost become. It was buried, not in soil, in a wall. The last man he killed had tried to crawl away. He had pinned him there, straight through the back, left the blade in, too tired to pull it out. The wind was cold that night, the stars too bright. He walked away without looking back. But later, he forged a new blade. Same shape, same weight, same edge. He never used it, just wore it. As a reminder, I could still be that man. But I choose not to. Except, some nights he still reached for it, without thinking. He tried. Once. Laid everything out by the fire. The glove, the pouch, the button, the hook, the mirror, watched them, waited for the feeling that told him he was free. It never came. The fire died. The night got cold. He picked them all up, one by one, wrapped them in cloth, carried them back. Because freedom, for people like him, wasn't found in letting go. It was found in learning how to carry the weight without drowning in it. It wasn't large, just a worn satchel, weathered, soft. No one paid it any mind. But inside, he carried a lifetime, mistakes, memories, things he didn't understand. He never unpacked it in front of others, never opened it in daylight. But each night, before sleep, he'd place it by his side, like a lover, like a tombstone, like a confession no priest could ever absolve. He wrote it on old parchment, with charcoal, folded it 3 times, no name, no address. It read, "These were not the things that made me a killer, but they were the things that kept me one." Then he tucked it into the satchel, closed the flap, and slept beside it for the rest of his days. He wasn't born without a face. He had one once, a name too, a mother who wiped mud from his cheek, a sister who called him by a nickname that made no sense. He used to laugh, used to cry. He had lips and teeth and skin that bruised easy. But the work doesn't allow for that. Not for long. It started with names. They took his real one first. Not violently, just quietly. They told him it was safer. That if no one knew who he was, he couldn't be found. He couldn't be hurt. He believed them. Then they took the rest. He stopped being greeted, even by his handler, even by the barkeeps who slipped him messages. They'd look past him, speak without eye contact. No good day. No how are you? He had become function, movement, an extension of a task. And it worked. He got better, quicker, colder, but it chipped at him, bit by bit, like wind wearing stone. At first he just glanced away, felt strange seeing his own eyes after a long night. Then he avoided them altogether, covered reflective surfaces, turned away from shop windows, refused to wash his face in clear water. It wasn't superstition. It was fear. Fear of recognition. Fear that the man looking back might not blink in time, might accuse. He never wore a mask, not the kind with strings. He wore his posture, his silence, his emptiness. That was enough. People didn't see him. Not really. And if they did, they forgot. Not because of magic, because no one wants to remember a face that brings death. And slowly, he forgot it too. Just a sketch, with charcoal, on cheap bark paper. But the lines shook. The eyes looked wrong. The nose was too sharp. The mouth had no shape. He tore it up, tried again and again, but every version looked like someone else, until one looked back at him and smiled. He burned the drawings after that, and never tried again. He was passing through a market, rain-soaked, half-starved. A child stared at him, not with fear, not with curiosity, with recognition. He stopped, kneeling down. "Have we met?" he whispered. The child didn't answer, just touched his cheek, then pointed at the puddle beside him. He looked. There was no reflection, only ripples. She was old, half blind, selling onions on a roadside. She said, "You have your father's jawline." He didn't respond, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. She remembered his father, a blacksmith, kind, firm. He had broken bread with him as a boy. He stood there, silent, then placed 2 coins on the table and walked away without onions, because some reminders don't need souvenirs. It came rarely, only when the nights were cold and the wind stilled enough to let memory through. He dreamed of a table, wooden, rough, with bread and soup and voices, laughter, a name spoken, his name. And in the dream, he smiled, not because of joy, but because someone said it out loud, and it didn't hurt. Then he'd wake, mouth open, and forget it all by morning. There was a grave, far from any road, unmarked, unvisited. He dug it himself, years ago, not for a body, for his name. He whispered it once before burying it, said goodbye like it was a sick child he couldn't save, then covered it with stones, and never spoke it again, even to himself, especially to himself. She had known him once, before shadows, before silence. She ran an inn now, recognized him the moment he walked in. "You've changed," she said, "but not your eyes." He looked away. "They're the only part of me I didn't kill." They ate in silence, and when he left, she called after him, "You still have a face, you just keep hiding it." He didn't answer, but her words followed him like a second shadow. Once, he wore someone else's face. Not literally, but their coat, their walk, their accent. He became them for a week, laughed in their voice, spoke with their inflections, even caught himself humming their favorite song. It was the easiest job he'd ever done. But afterward, he couldn't remember how he used to stand, or smile, or speak. He had replaced himself too well. He saw him bathing, a child, no older than 8, splashing, laughing, and then he turned. Their eyes met. The boy paused and said, "You look tired." It wasn't mockery. It wasn't pity. Just truth. The assassin nodded. "I am. You should rest." "I can't." "Then no one will remember your face." The boy dove underwater. By the time he surfaced, the man was gone. But the words clung to him like river mist. He found it hanging there, in a forest no one claimed, on a branch no one touched. A mask, woven from reeds, painted with ash. No expression, no eyes, no mouth. He took it down, held it, felt nothing, put it on, and wept. Not because it fit, because it didn't. Even that face belonged to someone else. He hadn't spoken in days, weeks maybe. Then, one night, he tried to hum a lullaby his mother once sang, but no sound came. His throat tightened, his chest ached. He tried again. Still nothing. That night, he carved into a tree. "Was I ever here?" And when he walked away, he didn't look back, because he feared the tree might whisper no. It happened in a chapel he was passing through, empty, safe. He caught his reflection in a stained glass basin, and for a moment he saw him, the boy, with crooked teeth, scars on the chin, hope in the eyes, then blinked, and it was gone, replaced by a man who had forgotten how to be anything but silent. He didn't die in glory, no blade, no betrayal. He simply stopped moving, stopped running, sat beneath an old tree, removed his satchel, laid it on the ground. Inside, a glove, a hook, a pouch, a mirror shard, and a folded note. This was not a face. It was a role, and I played it too long. They found him days later, eyes closed, peaceful, and still, faceless. It was not the kind of cold that kills. It was the kind that lingers, that starts in the toes, moves to the knees, then settles in the chest, where it makes a home. He had walked through snow before, slept in it, killed in it. But this winter, this was different. This one wanted to remember him, and it did. They offered extra coin, always did, in winter. because fewer men were willing to travel. Even fewer were willing to kill. He accepted it anyway, not for greed, not for pride, because the silence of snow matched the silence in him, and he thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be invisible in it. He was wrong. The snow saw. It was the first thing he noticed. Not the wind, not the ache in his joints, but how his blade refused to shine. No matter how he polished it, the frost dulled the edge, softened the metal. It still killed, but not cleanly. Every thrust dragged, every slice stuttered. It felt like the cold was trying to pull the blade back in, as if winter had claimed it, and him. At night, his breath came out in ghosts. He watched it curl, drift, die. Then again. It was the only movement he could trust. Even his hands stopped obeying, fingers too stiff, joints locked. He tried to light a fire once, failed. So he pressed his palms against his chest, listened to his own heartbeat, and whispered, "Not yet." It was the only warmth he had, and it wasn't much. Not all snow is quiet. Some sings, not in melodies, not in joy, in whispers, creaks beneath boots, hissing when it melts, a high-pitched hum when wind passes just right. He heard them all, and one night he heard his own name, soft, drawn out, carried by the breeze like a warning or a welcome. He didn't look back, but the wind laughed and kept calling. He found him beneath a tree, a rival, a thief, another blade for hire. He was kneeling, eyes open, mouth parted, hand still grasping the hilt of a knife buried in his own gut. Frozen solid, snow on his shoulders like a shroud. The assassin didn't steal his things, didn't bury him. He simply sat beside him and said, "I get it," then walked on, because even statues deserve respect, especially the kind that used to breathe. He reached a cottage 3 days later, empty, abandoned. He broke in, lit a fire, curled beside it, but the warmth didn't reach him. Not really. His skin thawed, but the cold inside, that stayed. It had settled behind his eyes, in his bones, in places no flame could touch. He sat there, staring, until the fire burned out. Then he stood, left, didn't close the door. Because what's the point when cold walks with you anyway? It hit just before dawn, not with flakes, with absence, no sound, no stars, no path, just white, and wind, and the sense that time itself had paused. He wrapped his cloak tighter, covered his face, but he couldn't cover the memory that came rushing back, the one of his brother, lost in a storm like this. They had screamed for each other. Only one voice answered. And now the silence sounded the same. He used to believe his rage kept him warm, that anger could be a hearth, that vengeance boiled hotter than blood. But that winter proved otherwise. He watched a man die slowly, begged for help, begged for fire. He didn't lift a finger, not out of cruelty, out of emptiness, because the fire was out, and he wasn't sure it had ever been real. It wasn't hunger that brought it. It wasn't even curiosity. It was recognition, a lone wolf, pale, silent, trailing him for 2 days, never attacked, never fled, just watched, like it knew, like it saw through the cloak, the blades, the pretense. They stared at each other once, across a frozen stream, both too tired to move. And for a moment, he wished the wolf would end it. But it didn't. It turned, left, because not all beasts kill their own kind. She wasn't supposed to be there. A small figure, huddled beneath a collapsed barn, wrapped in rags. He thought she was dead. But when he touched her shoulder, she moved, eyes opened, not in fear, not in hope, just recognition. "You're one of them," she said, "the ones who never die." He said nothing. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "The cold inside?" He did, but he lied. "No," she smiled, then closed her eyes. He sat beside her until morning. When he woke, she was gone. Not dead, not there, just gone, like warmth in a dream. He carried one letter, unread, sealed in wax, had done so for years. It came from a town he once passed through, where a man gave it to him, said it was from someone who remembered. He meant to burn it. Didn't. Winter made the wax brittle, the parchment stiff. One night he tried to open it. The seal cracked. The words inside smudged, illegible. But he thought he saw his name. Once, in the corner. Then frost took the rest. He placed it back in his coat, carried it still. Because sometimes hope is colder than death. He stopped hearing things, not suddenly, gradually. First, the wind faded, then bird song. Then even his own breath. The silence became solid, like stone. He screamed into it once. The sound didn't come back. It stayed stuck in the frozen branches above. He wasn't deaf. The world had just gone quiet in protest. Even nature refused to speak to him. He came upon it one morning, still, glass-like, unbroken. He stared into it for an hour, saw nothing, no face, no eyes, just the outline of a man-shaped absence. He stepped forward. The ice creaked, and in it, he heard something. A child's laughter, his mother's voice, a name, his name. He dropped to his knees. The ice didn't break, but he did. They weren't real. He knew that. But he heard them, behind him, around him, inside him. Soft crunches, measured pace, a rhythm he remembered, his own. He turned. No one there. But the steps continued, because even in snow, you can't outrun yourself. He reached it near dusk. Empty windows, shuttered doors, ash in chimneys. No smoke, no voices. He opened one door, found bowls still full, a chair knocked over, a dog asleep forever by the hearth. Whatever happened, it hadn't been quick or loud. It was a winter thing, a silent death, the kind you don't notice until it's over. He didn't stay the night. He left an offering of salt, not out of belief, out of respect. It came unexpectedly. He lay beneath pine, eyes closed, half dead, and suddenly, sunlight, green fields, running water, a woman's laugh. He was barefoot, young, free. He touched a flower. It turned to snow. He woke up with frost on his lips. It had protected him for years, but one morning he tried to take it off, and it stayed. The lining had frozen to his shoulder, to his arm, to the scar across his ribs. He cut it off, bit by bit, not with regret, with relief. But his skin tore too, bled slowly in the cold, and he smiled, because pain meant something still felt. He found dry wood, flint, even a match. He could have lit it, could have sat by it, but he didn't. He stared at the kindling and said, "I don't deserve warmth." Then buried the supplies under snow and walked into the trees. Because sometimes cold is what you choose when guilt becomes your home. He didn't fall. He lay down, chose a soft patch beneath a snow-laden tree, set down his blade, his pouch, his final weight, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Let this be enough." The wind howled once, as if answering, then softened, and silence returned. Not the silence of winter, the silence of peace. Not yet. A passing monk found him, took him in, fed him, warmed him. He didn't speak, not for weeks. Then, one morning, he said, "I forgot how to burn." The monk smiled. "Then start with breath, and build from there." And so he did. He told this story to no one, wrote it once, burned it. All that remained was a cloak with frost marks, a mirror with cracks, and a man who finally believed he could sleep without dreaming of snow. They didn't send him there to kill, just to watch, observe, report. No weapons drawn, no blood spilled. A quiet assignment, they said. But the quiet ones always echo the longest. The village wasn't on any map. No road signs, no stones with names, just a worn path that curved like a question through a dead forest. He reached it by dusk. The sun behind him, ash in the wind. The smell hit first. Burned wood, wet soot, and something else. Sweet, wrong. The scent of memory scorched. He expected smoke, flames. Instead, only embers. Blackened beams leaned like wounded soldiers. Chimneys stood without houses. Wells were dry and cracked. No screams, no heat. Just aftermath. The kind that doesn't shout. It whispers. "You're too late." But he wasn't, because the job wasn't to save. It was to see and never forget. He walked slowly, boots crunching over what used to be life. At first, he thought it was snow. Then he saw the black stains, the shapes of hands on walls, the child-sized shoes half buried. The ash was layered, thick, preserved, like the fire had stopped at the exact moment they screamed. Frozen combustion. Time paused in ruin. He knelt once, touched the ground, and it stuck to his fingers. Felt like memory. One building still stood, barely. A barn, warped with heat, but whole. Inside, rows of tools, a cot, and drawings on the wall, crude, made with charcoal, figures, faces. He counted 12. Under each, a name. He didn't recognize them, but someone had wanted them remembered. He closed the barn door softly, as if not to wake the ghosts. It limped from behind rubble, one ear gone, fur scorched, eyes too knowing. It didn't growl, didn't bark, just sat, stared at him, as if saying, "I remember." He offered food. It didn't eat, just sniffed his cloak, snorted, and walked away. That night, he heard it howling in the hills. Long, slow. A requiem. He found it near the well, wrapped in cloth, tucked in a jar, water-stained, half burnt, but legible. They came not for war, but for silence, to erase our names without blade. Tell the ones who read this, we were, and we mattered. No signature, no date. He folded it, placed it in his coat, because silence must be carried until spoken. Not a real one, not aloud. But as he stood in the square, he heard it. In the wind, in the way ash swirled around his boots, in the creak of collapsed roofs. It didn't say his name. It didn't accuse. It just existed, lingered, like breath held too long. He found him in the church, or what was left of it, kneeling before a shattered altar, hands clasped, skin blistered, lips cracked, alive, barely. When asked why he didn't run, he whispered, "Because someone had to remember." Then closed his eyes and didn't speak again. The assassin left him there, not out of cruelty, out of respect, because some prayers are meant for ash alone, a cellar, hidden beneath rubble. He almost missed it. Inside, blankets, toys, bones. Not many, just enough. On the wall, scratched words in small hands. They said hide. We tried. He stood there longer than he should have, then turned off the lantern and shut the door, because some goodbyes don't need light. He left the village by dawn, didn't speak a word, didn't look back. But silence followed, clung to his cloak, settled in his bones. Even the birds stopped singing. Even the river hushed. Every step felt like it echoed through burned walls and shallow graves. And though his job was done, he didn't feel finished. Because ash doesn't settle. It hovers, waiting to be remembered. He returned to his contact, an old merchant, more mask than man. "Did you see it?" the merchant asked. He nodded. "And?" He pulled out the sealed letter, the child scribbled words, the list of names from the barn wall. "They didn't scream," he said. "They just vanished." The merchant frowned. "So there's nothing left?" He paused, then whispered, There's too much. He never wrote the report. Some stories don't belong on paper. It stayed with him. Not the sight, not the sounds, the smell. Burned earth, wet cinder, hair, hope. Even weeks later, he would wake at night with the scent in his nostrils. Check his hands, his boots, still clean. But not inside. Never inside. He met him in a tavern, dusty, loud, a farmer, rough hands, eyes too tired. They shared a drink, then silence. Finally, the stranger said, "Ever been to a place that didn't want to be remembered?" He stiffened. Yes. The farmer nodded, took another sip. Then you already know. They didn't speak again. But he never forgot that face, or the scar shaped like a flame just below the man's eye. He asked once, in another town, "Do you know of a village west of the river where the trees don't grow back?" Blank stares, shrugs. One woman said, "There used to be something there, long ago, but no one remembers." He almost laughed, because forgetting, that's how it works. Not with violence, not with force, with time, with permission. In a city square, he saw a beggar boy, filthy, barefoot, carrying a sack of coal. When asked where he came from, the boy said, "A place that turned black." "Does it have a name?" "No, but it had people." "Do you remember them?" The boy hesitated. "I remember a doll and someone singing." Then nothing. He handed the boy a coin. The boy stared at it. "We didn't have those." Then walked away. She stopped him on a bridge. Old, gray eyes, clutching something. "You were there," she said. He didn't deny it. "So was I. I left early, took the road east. My son stayed behind." She held out a small cloth. Inside, a tiny wooden horse, burnt on one side. "If you see him..." He took it. Didn't promise. Just nodded. Because ghosts don't return. And neither do sons. One night, in his sleep, he smelled ash again. But this time, it was different. Lighter. Sweeter. He followed it through dream. Found himself in a house. Small. Warm. A woman stirred soup. A child laughed. A fire burned right, not wrong. He stepped forward. The woman turned. "You're not supposed to be here." He woke. The taste of smoke still in his throat. He was deep in the forest. Alone. Snow falling. Night approaching. He built a fire. Small. Careful. not for warmth, for memory. He placed the letter in the flame, then the cloth doll, then a torn name from the barn. He watched them burn, watched the embers rise, then whispered, "I saw you." And the fire, for once, did not smell like death. He never returned. But it never left. He carried it in his pack, in his boots, in his breath, and in silence. Not the kind forced by fear, the kind chosen by the only person left to remember. Because sometimes being a witness is the cruelest weapon of all. He noticed it first in the quiet, not in the noise of steel, not in footsteps on stone, not in screams, but in the stillness between breaths. Something shifted, a presence, not of a man, not of a god, but of something that only came when the last lamp died and no one was supposed to be awake. The night watcher. He had learned to feel it, not see, never see, just the weight of gaze from places no eye should fit, the corners of alleyways, behind door hinges, in the spaces between flickering torchlight. He would turn quickly. Nothing, no wind, no sound, but the feeling lingered, as if the darkness itself had eyelids, and they had just blinked. It was routine. A nobleman, suspected of treason, unliked by everyone. Poison, dagger, escape. Simple. But that night, the streets were too silent, the crows too still. Even the dogs didn't bark. He climbed the wall, crept through the window, and froze. Not because of guards, because someone had already done it. The nobleman, gutted, staring, a symbol carved into his neck. Not his mark, someone else's, something older, something watching. In a candlelit room, his own shadow lagged. He noticed it while sharpening a blade. His hand moved, but the silhouette twitched late, paused in a strange angle, frozen mid-gesture. When he stood, it stayed seated. He covered the candle, lit another. The shadow returned to normal. But from that night on, he stopped trusting reflections. Because the night watcher didn't need light to see. It only needed memory. And he had plenty of that. He asked about it. Once, deep in the hills, in a monastery too small to matter. The old monk had scars on his eyelids, blind, smiling. "You've seen it," the monk said. He didn't answer, didn't need to. The monk continued, "It watches those who watch too much. When you steal lives, it steals pieces of you." "What does it want?" he asked. The monk's smile faded. "For you to know it's there." He rented a room, cheap, unremarkable, but on the wall, Beneath peeling plaster, a single line scratched deep. I see you. He touched it, felt cold, not of air, but of absence. That night, he didn't sleep, because sometimes walls don't just hear, they remember, and they warn. He once hid in the woods, avoiding a bounty. No town, no fire, just trees, and the sound. It came after midnight, soft footsteps, padded, inhuman, not running, not creeping, circling. He drew his dagger, held his breath. The sound stopped. Then, a whisper behind his ear. Not words, just air. Breathing. He didn't turn, didn't move. Eventually, the cold left. But the memory stayed like frostbite. She hosted him once, a healer, lived alone. Every mirror in her home was covered with black cloth. He asked why. She answered with a question. How many times have you seen your death and called it a shadow? That night he peeked beneath one cloth, only for a moment. What he saw was not himself. It was his absence. His cloak moved, but not his body. His eyes blinked, but not in rhythm. He replaced the cloth with shaking hands, and didn't ask again. It was winter. He sat by a dying fire, felt nothing, no hunger, no ache, no warmth. He blinked, but the night didn't change. He stood, walked, touched a tree, no feeling. He bit his tongue, no taste. He wasn't cold, wasn't warm, just present, observed. When morning came, he checked his reflection. His eyes were open in sleep. It wasn't cloudy. The sky was clear. Birds flew, merchants shouted, but he cast no shadow. He stood in the middle of the street, waited, looked down. Nothing. People passed. Some glanced. Most didn't. He moved his arm. The light passed through, not like a ghost, like something that had been unwritten. That night, he didn't light a candle, because what use is fire to something no longer lit from within? He went to his usual spot, sat down, ordered nothing. A man at the next table leaned over. "That seat's cursed," he said. "Why?" "Someone used to sit there, always alone, always quiet. Then one day, gone." He nodded slowly. "I know." "You knew him?" A pause. "I still do." The man frowned, but said no more. Some truths aren't made for daylight. He was cleaning his blade, polishing it. Same routine, same cloth, same motion. But no matter how he turned it, no reflection. The metal gleamed, but his face never came back. He saw things in it, though, not himself. Eyes, fingers, flashes of places he'd been, and the mark, the old one, the Watcher's symbol, etched so faintly he hadn't noticed it for years. It pulsed once, then faded, as if it had always been there, waiting. He wrote something. Didn't know who for, didn't know why. He just needed it out. If you find this, don't remember me. Just remember the silence I left behind. There was no glory, no justice, no purpose. Only breath and the debt it brought. He sealed it, buried it beneath a tree he used to sit under as a child, a place where no one watched, not even the birds. She shouldn't have noticed. 4 years old, playing in the mud. But when he passed, she stopped, looked at him, not with fear, not with wonder, but with complete understanding. "You're the one who stays awake when everyone's asleep," she said. He crouched down, met her eyes. "How do you know?" "Because I see you in my dreams, and you're never blinking." Her mother called her back. She skipped away. He stood there for a long time, afraid to move, because when innocence sees you, you've truly become real, or no longer human. It came one night. No noise, no smoke, just a feather, black, weightless, laid at his door. No bird nearby, no wind. He picked it up, felt a sting in his palm. Blood welled. He smiled, because pain meant he was still here, at least for now. But even feathers carry messages, and this one whispered, "You're almost ready." He walked through a city. People bustled. Markets thrived. He waved to a man he once knew. No response. Touched a woman's shoulder. She turned right through him, looked into a mirror. Nothing. The city kept moving. Without him, he screamed. No echo. He woke in sweat. Looked at his hands. Still there. Still calloused. Still warm. But that didn't mean he was real. Only that the dream hadn't claimed him yet. It came without warning. No scroll, no coin, no face, just a knock. No one outside. Only a note on the ground. One line. Return what you took. He didn't ask questions. Didn't pack. Just walked. Back through cities, forests, fields turned to ruin, to the place where he first killed, where the blood soaked the roots, where the night watcher first opened its eyes. It was there, buried under moss, still whole, a mirror, not his, but familiar. He stared into it, saw not his face, but every face he had ended, all watching, none angry, just tired. Behind them, the watcher, not a thing, not a being, just a knowing. It stepped forward, and he whispered, "I know." The mirror cracked, and so did he. They say he vanished. Some claim he walked into the woods and never returned. Others say they saw him by candlelight in abandoned towers or ruined churches, but none could describe his face, because faces are for people, not shadows, and he was finally part of the dark he had once walked through. He was not punished. He was not saved. He was seen, and in being seen, he disappeared. Because that's what the night watcher wants. Not blood, not soul, just the quiet knowing that even killers can't look away forever.